Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really heated online debate that gets at a huge question. Who gets to define Black identity in America? It's a story that's all about acronyms, accusations, and how a movement born online can end up shaking the very foundations of academia.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at how this whole thing just exploded into the mainstream. Then we'll get into what these key terms at the center of the controversy actually mean. After that, we'll explore the ideological clash that makes this topic so heated. Then we're going to dig into how a Harvard study on all this went spectacularly wrong before finally asking, what does this all really tell us about online debate today?
Okay, so it all kind of kicks off with a pretty familiar face, political commentator Candace Owens. Her association with a growing online movement dragged this really intense, kind of niche conversation out of the internet's back corners and right into the national spotlight.
And this quote, wow, it really gets to the heart of the fight, doesn't it? That word, boogeyman, that's the key here. It suggests that these new identity movements are being unfairly painted as something scary, as a monster, by their political opponents. And that's a theme we're going to see again and again.
Candace Owens getting involved, it was like throwing gasoline on an already smoldering fire. Her platform is just massive, and it totally amplified these lineage-based identity movements, yanking them out of the online fringes and forcing them into the mainstream conversation. So this all leads us to the big puzzle, right? What in the world do FBA and ADOS actually stand for? I mean, to really get why there's such a firestorm, we've got to understand the language first. All right, let's do it. Let's break these terms down, because if we don't get the vocabulary straight, none of the rest of this is going to make sense.
Okay, first stop, ADOS. It stands for American Descendants of Slavery. And the whole idea here, the really crucial part, is specificity. The argument is that the unique legacy of chattel slavery in the U.S. creates this really distinct political identity, with a specific claim for justice and reparations that they say sets them apart from other Black communities.
And then you've got FBA, or Foundational Black Americans. This term also hones in on that deep-rooted American lineage. And the language here is so important. That word, foundational, is picked for a reason. It's this powerful statement that this group's ancestors weren't just here. They were essential to building the country itself. So, okay, what's the real difference between them? I mean, they sound pretty similar, right? Well, while there's a ton of overlap, you can kind of think of it like this. ADOS tends to be more of a political movement with a very clear goal, reparations. FBA, on the other hand, is often used as more of a broad cultural identifier, really emphasizing a shared history and heritage. They're really like two sides of the same coin, just with a slightly different spin. Okay, so now we know what the words mean, but that still doesn't explain why they're so incredibly controversial. Let's get into the ideological clash that's really at the heart of all this. So a huge point of friction here is the clash with Pan-Africanism, this idea that all people of African descent share a common identity and destiny. Critics say that by focusing so intensely on American lineage, ADOS and FBA are basically creating a divide between Black Americans and Black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean. But of course, supporters see it completely differently. For them, being called a bogeyman isn't just an insult. It's a calculated political move. It's a way for opponents to shut them down without ever having to actually deal with their core arguments about justice and lineage.
And this is where the whole thing gets even messier. Because on top of all the ideological debate, you have these really serious accusations of, well, things not being what they seem. We're talking about claims of coordinated campaigns, bots, trolls, and even stories about outsiders pretending to be members online. The big fear is that these groups are being hijacked, or maybe even created, to cause division inside the Black community, especially around election time.
This whole online firestorm got so big, so loud, that it ended up on the radar of one of the most famous universities in the world, Harvard. They decided to actually study the movement. But what they found, and oh man, what happened next, was nothing short of explosive.
So you have to wonder, how does this incredibly tangled, messy digital debate end up under the microscope in the halls of academia? And, maybe more importantly, how did it all go so spectacularly wrong? So this timeline really just lays out the whole dramatic arc. It starts with all this chatter online, these claims of disinformation. Then, boom, a Harvard journal publishes a formal paper on it. But almost the second it was published, it got hit with a tidal wave of criticism over its methods. The backlash was so massive that the journal did something pretty rare. They retracted the whole thing, a full retraction. They basically said, yeah, our study was fundamentally flawed. I mean, that is a huge embarrassment for an institution like Harvard.
And just get a load of the title of that paper they pulled back. Strategic Weaponization. Whoa. I mean, those are some heavy words. This wasn't some neutral academic look. From the title alone, it was framing the ADOS movement as a potential threat right from the get-go. Okay, so after all of that, the online fights, the political drama, this whole retracted Harvard study mess, what are we left with? What's the bigger takeaway here? What does this whole episode really tell us about the world we're living in right now?
When you really boil it all down, this whole thing seems to balance on three major pressure points. First, you've got identity. Is this a legit expression of a unique Black American experience or something else? Then there's authenticity. Are we looking at a real grassroots movement, or is it being secretly manipulated? And finally, there's the battle over the narrative. Who actually gets to control the story here? The people inside the movement, or their critics on the outside?
And that really leaves us with the question of our digital age, doesn't it? In a world where anyone can be anonymous, where bots and trolls are everywhere, and where politics is so polarized, how on earth do you tell the difference between a genuine movement for justice and a weaponized online campaign designed to tear us apart? That's the challenge this story leaves us with.